Today we're going to be talking about multidimensional consciousness. So if you've ever heard me speak before, it's probably a term you've heard me use before. And there are multiple ways of defining it, and there are multiple models that one can use. Today I'm going to talk you through one particular model that I like to use and that I hope will help you in creating the highest future for yourself. So all of the work I teach is very practical, so it's not just about expanding consciousness in a meditative state, it's actually about bringing expanded consciousness, expanded awareness into the human realm, into the human body, and actually living from a place of expanded consciousness. In Kabbalah, they talk about 3 parts of the path. And the first part of the path is we descend unconsciously from the infinite, the source of all creation. And the second part of the path is that we have to ascend back up to the source of all. And we expand our consciousness up there, out of the body. And we realize that we're interconnected. Even though down here we seem like we're separate. So when people are unconscious, they're in this separation or in the illusion of separation. But we ascend up through a multidimensionality and we access the aspect of ourselves which knows ourselves to be interconnected with all beings and all things and part of the one creation. But the third part of the path is to descend back into the body, conscious and aware of our interconnectedness, conscious and aware of higher levels of experience, our multi-layered potential, our multifaceted being as humans, and to live in the world from there. That is the third part of the path. It exists also in the Eastern tradition, these teachings, and in fact that's what was meant by the middle way. But those teachings given by the Buddha have been distorted. Only one aspect of the teaching, one part of the teaching has really been relayed into mainstream culture, particularly in the West. So all of my work helps you not only expand your consciousness and perhaps out of the body, but I'm always teaching you how to apply it into your life, into the world, back into the world of form, because this is where we have to evolve human consciousness, and this is where we have to evolve our culture. So one model that I like to use to help you understand how to do that, how to live your highest potential from an expanded state of consciousness, is to use a 3-tiered model. Is that 3? 3-tiered model. And they're basically 3 spheres of consciousness that I like to talk about. So there's a sphere of consciousness in the center, which I call the conscious part of our consciousness. Then there's a part which I call the subconscious. And that's all that's hidden and underneath the consciousness, what we think is going on. There's a subconscious aspect of that. And then there's another sphere, which I call the superconscious. And that superconscious is above our conscious mind, if you like, above what we know to be true here and now. one way of thinking about it is that the subconscious holds all of our past. In the human realm, time is linear, and space, there are physical, spatial differences. We are separated by time and space in the human realm, in the physical realm. So there is a past, there is a present, and then there is a future in this reality. In the non-physical reality, time doesn't necessarily work like that. But for the purpose of this discussion, we are talking about the past, the present, and the future, and that's how we are moving through our cultural history. So the subconscious in this model relates to everything in the past. And in particular, it relates to all of our subconscious trauma, so the unhealed past, if you like. From a spiritual point of view, anything that's occurred in the past that has occurred with love has no need to be healed. It exists in the collective consciousness as love. It's the trauma that needs to be healed. It is the unfreedom, the unlove, the untruth which needs to be brought into conscious awareness, be healed, so that we can create the highest potential future going forward. So the subconscious refers to our past. So there's an individual subconscious, but there's also a collective subconscious. Just like there's an individual conscious present, and there's a collective consciousness in the present. Analogously, there is a superconscious potential for the individual as well as for the collective, for the group, whichever group you're talking about. So the superconscious is our potential futures, because the future has not been decided yet, hasn't been lived yet. So depending on our level of awareness, depending on our level of consciousness in the present, and depending on the choices that we take here in the present, we plug into a potential future accordingly. So when I talk about living your highest potential future, I'm talking about you waking up in the present and choosing, taking action towards your highest potential future. So some teachers who've become popular in the last several years talk about being fully in the present, and it's extremely important in our culture to really be immersed in the present, to be fully awake, to be deeply conscious about the here and now. But what I've found with the people I've worked with and the people I've met and the work that I do is that it's not enough to be fully in the present. There seems to be an escalation of the pace at which we are being called to heal the past, the negative past of this planetary culture. So if we're fully present in the now, and we don't commit any more future negativity, we will definitely heal things, and we'll definitely plug into a potential future that is evolutionary, and that is better than if we were not conscious and in a repetitive cycle of recreating unhealed, previous traumatic patterning. So most people are in a state of unconsciousness, unawareness, and in habitual behaviours, repeating negative patterning that either their parents did and that they were conditioned with, or that the culture of their origin conditioned them with, or some traumatic event from their childhood or from their subconscious, or if you believe in multi-lifetime models, some spiritual traditions will tell you that you're in repetition of your karma from your previous incarnations. So wherever you believe that patterning comes from, wherever is true for you is fine. But if you're unconscious, you're in constant repetition of the unconscious patterns without evolving. So in each moment we have an opportunity to be present, to either stay at the same level or to evolve. And if we're not in the present, if we're unconscious in the present, we actually de-evolve because we're in unconsciousness. Our consciousness is deadened, and we're just repeating old patterns without awareness, without consciousness, without deep presence, without exercising agency, without exercising our human capacity for intention, for choice, for creative consciousness. So, to expand on the superconscious sphere, that is part of ourselves that we may not have access to in our daily life. And there's states of consciousness that we can access, say perhaps in meditation, perhaps with some kind of spiritual training. They're higher and expanded states of consciousness that are still us, but we may not know how to tap into it in our everyday daily life. But as we move into spiritual mastery, as we become a spiritual master, we live more and more in what used to be known as the superconscious. So our consciousness expands to include the superconscious states, the highest potential of our being. So a real spiritual master looks like anyone else, but they are living in a waking meditation state. They are fully awake, fully embodied, here in the human form, but from a heightened state of what we call non-duality, of knowing the highest existence, the highest truth, and understanding the ultimate reality. Some language used to refer to that state of beingness. So that's why it's difficult to tell the difference between just a normal person who's living even in an unconscious state and a fully conscious, awakened being who's living every moment of their life embodied and awake in a state of pure love, in a state of pure presence, from a place of superconscious activation. And that is the potential for us as spiritual masters in the human realm. And unlike mainstream exoteric religions teach, that state of beingness is possible for many, many, many people, not for a select few. The Buddha said that everyone could take that state of illumination, even in one incarnation. So the exoteric religions that teach that it's a state reserved and exclusive for a special few, I believe is fallacy, and I believe is distortion of teaching. So if you are willing, you can move into superconscious states of beingness, living in a waking meditation, a wakefulness of being fully integrated through your consciousness. And at that state of being, the cells are even awake. The brain is awake. People will say in mainstream culture that we only use 5 to 10% of our brain capacity. But in superconscious unlocking, we actually open up those parts of our brain that allow us to live in states of genius consciousness, of creative genius. And even things that people can't seemingly rationalize in this realm, in this world. Things like the mystics will remember states of being in other dimensions, or they'll remember pre-incarnation contracts that they made of what they're going to do in this life. Or they'll remember meeting a being, another person, who they have an instant soul connection in another state of consciousness, in another dimension. Knowing them from somewhere else, for example. So there is superconscious potential in Sanskrit, it's called siddhis, that are unlocked. But even if those kind of things that maybe mainstream Western culture thinks are weird don't open up, there's still a potential to live your highest capacity here in this world, in your relationships, in your creative purpose. Really accessing heightened states of vitality, energy, vibrancies, feeling the cells enthused in alignment. And really being fully here now. Really giving yourself to this life, fully engaged, rather than going through life in a robotic, unconscious, inattentive way. Most people are sleepwalking through life. Even those people who think that they're highly awake, many of those people are sleepwalking through life. So, I like to talk about this model which has the conscious realm, the subconscious realm, and the superconscious realm. And I like to use this language which we use in spiritual language, and it's existed for eons in the spiritual traditions, the esoteric spiritual traditions, but was made popular in the Western psychological tradition by Carl Jung. And it's language that uses the term the shadow. So the shadow is the part of ourselves that we can't see, right? So by definition, the conscious realm is the part that we can see or perceive. And by definition, the subconscious and the superconscious are part of the shadow. Having said that, we split the shadow into the subconscious, which is the negative traumata, and into the superconscious, which is the highest positive potential, unlived, untapped positive potential. So language we can use is that the subconscious is called the negative shadow. And that's the part of ourselves that we need to heal and evolve and bring love to. The parts of ourselves that are fragmented and dissociated and disconnected and shamed and persecuted and that are lost. Those parts of ourselves which we push into the deep subconscious because they're too painful to look at. Or maybe we don't have the skills to look at them and know what to do with them in a healthy way. So that's called the negative shadow. And then the positive shadow, which can also be called the golden shadow, is the part of ourselves we cannot see, the untapped future potential of all the goodness, all the truth, all of our creative gifts and talents in their highest manifestation, all of the possible potentials in the most beautiful, the most joyous and the most fulfilling way. So there are these aspects of ourselves that we haven't yet seen and we haven't yet tapped into, but they're there. So as we expand our consciousness, there are two aspects, as far as I'm concerned, of expanding your consciousness and really becoming integrated with your consciousness, and that's what I call integration of consciousness. You have to heal the negative subconscious, negative shadow, and then you have to access and step into the positive potential of the superconscious, the golden shadow. You have to move into the awareness of those parts of yourself and then step in and become embodied in those. It's like waking up these dormant gifts that you didn't even know you had. If you've ever seen that film Limitless with Bradley Cooper, I love him in that film. He takes a pill at the beginning of the film that unlocks all of these super potential gifts and talents and capacities. And by the end of the film, sorry if this is a spoiler, he's actually learnt how to do that on his own without depending on the pill. And that's the truth of spiritual training and spiritual mastery. Sadly, our culture thinks that the way that we are going to fulfill our potential is through a pill or a drug. And you see many, many mainstream, modern spiritual teachers talking about unlocking consciousness through drug taking, which is fine because that's their experience. But there are so many other ways to open your own consciousness, your superconsciousness, that are safe, that are regulated, and that have a procedure and a practice. And that's what spiritual training is about. It's about doing it in a safe and responsible and an efficacious way that then you move into your life with that. It's not dissociated from your regular life. You bring those heightened states of consciousness into your life. So most people think that we're born with skills and talents and they're either there or they're not. And although it's true that people are born with skills and talents, it's also true that we can unlock things that are dormant within us as we move through life. And it's interesting to me how people spend so much time investing in children's talents, but when they get to a certain age, they stop investing in their own talents and they think they need to have one career for the rest of their life. The truth is we unlock things as we evolve and as we grow. And I was always fascinated by the work of Oliver Sacks, the neurologist, because from when I was a young age, and he wrote quite a lot about brain injury, and that's, kind of fueled my passion for neuroscience, because all of these little vignettes about patients who had brain injury, but the brain injury is not the end of the story. The end of the story was about them unlocking other superconscious potential, other parts of the brain that they didn't know were there before. So a guy who woke up one day and became this incredible artist. And it sounds kind of like a fantasy or fantastical when I speak about it now. But those are the things that can actually happen when you open to the superconscious and when you expand into your superconscious potential. And when you actually anchor your spiritual gifts in the world, you actually become more and more in the flow. You become more and more in those states of genius consciousness. Sometimes that's called channeling. Sometimes we say we're downloading from non-physical realms. But there's a connection that is strengthened and fortified as you engage in spiritual work and in spiritual practice. And through that connection. You access higher states of consciousness, and then you learn how to bring that into human form. For the purpose of serving all of humanity, and for the purpose of progressing culture, for the purpose of healing and creatively serving. Multidimensional consciousness and being integrated with multidimensional consciousness is being simultaneously deeply in the present while healing the past and while plugging into your highest superconscious potential, your highest future, your best life, the best life for all humanity that you can plug into, the best vision, and then land in that vision in the world. Genius consciousness opens us to creativity, imagination, being a visionary, being futuristic, accessing ideas for preceding even problems. It's not problem solving, but actually moving into states of solutions and preempting a crisis, for example. So as we grow in consciousness, the subconscious actually gets smaller and the superconscious even gets smaller, because we embrace those parts and we integrate those parts and we learn what to do with those parts. So our consciousness is quite expanded, it's quite broad, it's heightened, and it's why if you've ever been in the presence of a really awake person, you know that they're deeply present. Their memory is switched on. They remember details. And if you see the film, and I urge you to see that film, Limitless, there's, I think, around minute number 10 or 11 in the film, when Bradley Cooper's character takes the pill and then everything clicks into this heightened awareness, and he remembers things from college. And his vision is precise. And, you know, I don't necessarily agree with the next part of the film, which is where he's also got heightened sexual energy and he doesn't know what to do with it. So, yes, so as we move into expanded states of consciousness, we heal the subconscious and we access the superconscious. So our awareness is increased, and we're actually aware of multiple aspects of consciousness simultaneously. And it can actually get overwhelming for some people because it's kind of too much to understand and take in all at the same time. But if you understand what is happening and you understand how to use those heightened states of consciousness, then it is more non-violent, it's gentler. And I'm saying that because people are actually having spontaneous experiences of all these multidimensional levels of consciousness, but they've never had the language for it, no one's ever spoken about it, they've never met another person who has gone through that or understands it even. So it can be quite lonely if you're one of those people, if you've had spontaneous expansions in consciousness and spontaneous spiritual awakenings, and you don't actually have practices or tools or methods or language to even voice what is going on for you. So I'm speaking to that because I've met many people who that has happened to spontaneously, and they're not even interested in illumination or enlightenment or spiritual awakening or becoming a spiritual master, but it's just all happened for them spontaneously, without any training, without a container that's safe for them to understand what's happening, and without any kind of methodology for how to apply that. So that happens in spiritual awakening, is that your state of consciousness can expand, and what happens then is you actually have more perception of the negative subconscious trauma. You might have glimpses or heightened perception of your superconscious potential as well, which is actually beautiful and exciting and more fun. But having heightened awareness means you also have heightened perception of the negativity, of the dark, of the unhealed stuff, of the traumata. Sometimes that's not even your own traumata, it's the traumata of your family or the traumata of your ancestral lineage, or the trauma of the collective narrative of this species or of this planet. So when people have heightened states of consciousness, they can actually perceive the collective unconscious. And for those people who are healing a lot in their own life, and they've been called to heal a lot through personal circumstances of very difficult karmic circumstances, negative karma in their life that they were born into perhaps, or that they experienced as young children, or just given the culture or the time or the gender or the sexual orientation or whatever difficulty, whatever outcasting within a culture, most of those people are healing things not only in their own subconscious traumatic vault, but they're healing things in the traumatic vault of the collective subconscious. So the part of the individual that's conscious versus the part of the individual that's unconscious. The unconscious is split into the subconscious and the superconscious. Similarly, there's a part of the collective consciousness that's unconscious and conscious. The part of the collective unconscious is also the subconscious versus the superconscious of the collective. So even as a species, we have the potential to climb into our higher superconscious potential. And that's why, as an individual who's awakening, or who's choosing to become integrated, or who's choosing to illuminate themselves, to heal what they're responsible for, and to tap into their highest potential gifts and talents, that individual, even if no one else does anything to evolve our culture and our collective narrative, that individual is helping to move our cultural narrative into a more positive future. So it's important, the work that you do. It's important, the integration you do. It's important to find the courage to look and deeply heal the trauma of your own life, the trauma that you've been called to heal, and to find the courage to shine brightly, to step into your highest potential, to step into your skills, talents, gifts. Many of those people who are called to high spiritual training are deeply empathetic, so they'd rather just be helping others. They'd rather step out of the way and allow others to shine. But the problem on our planet has been that the people with narcissistic tendencies are the ones that are out front and centre. And the people who are gentle and kind and empathetic and who would rather lead from behind are the ones who should actually be leading from the front. And we're actually at a crux time on our planet when those people who would rather lead from behind, who would rather be behind the curtain, are being called out in front of the curtain to make way for a new paradigm on our planet. That the people who want to be front and centre for fame and fortune and superficial reasons of power and all of the other superficial reasons, those people are no longer being allowed to be front and centre. There is a movement on our planet, an evolution on our planet, where the people who are celebrated are the people who should really be celebrated, which is what the word celebrity means, one who is celebrated. So we move to a culture on our planet where the people who are celebrated are the people who are those who are deeply connected, deeply empathetic, deeply compassionate, kind, loving, and whose life is a living example of love in action. I just want to add one more concept, and that is many people get stuck just healing the subconscious, and others get stuck just chasing the superconscious. So in my experience, you need to balance the two. You need to heal the traumatic past, and you need to step into the superconscious potential. Only then is the process completing. And it's always in completion. But you can chase the superconscious potential and turn your back on the negative shadow, and that's destructive for people. That's beyond the scope of this talk, but I talk about it elsewhere. And then there are people who just turn towards the negative shadow and never, ever, ever look at their superconscious capacity, and they're trapped in the darkness, they're trapped in the trauma, they're trapped in the sludge of the pain and the suffering, and they can't get themselves out because they're in an addictive pattern there. So it's really important to be balanced in the conscious realm, to be able to look at the subconscious, but the purpose of looking at the subconscious and healing the subconscious is in order to access the superconscious wealth in all dimensions. As I talk about physical health and wealth, vitality and energy, emotional wealth, intellectual wealth, and creativity in the mind with the brain, spiritual wealth, relationship wealth, societal and cultural wealth through accessing creative gifts, and planetary wealth. Because our planet really is an abundant home for us, and the ecology of our life and our homes are interconnected. So, thank you so much for joining me. If you'd like to join me in the deep dive, I'll see you there. I'll talk to you there. Otherwise, I will see you and talk to you very soon.